Ms. Johnson had been working as a maid for the wealthy Smith family for several years. She was known for her exceptional cleaning skills and attention to detail. The family trusted her implicitly, and she had become a familiar face in their home. However, what the family didn't know was that Ms. Johnson had been harboring feelings for the family's young son, Alex. At first, it was just a harmless crush, but over time it grew into something more sinister. As time went on, Ms. Johnson's behavior towards Alex became increasingly inappropriate. She would often make suggestive comments and find excuses to touch him. Alex, who was uncomfortable with the situation, tried to avoid her as much as possible. Despite his best efforts, Ms. Johnson continued to pursue him. She would often show up in his room unannounced, claiming that she needed to clean or do laundry. Alex would try to leave, but she would block his way, her eyes lingering on him in a way that made him feel uneasy. One day, Alex's parents were away on a business trip, leaving him alone in the house with Ms. Johnson. She saw this as the perfect opportunity to make her move. As Alex was studying in his room, Ms. Johnson entered and began to make suggestive comments. At first, Alex tried to brush her off, but Ms. Johnson's behavior became more and more aggressive. She began to touch him, her hands roaming over his body in a way that made him feel trapped and scared. Alex, realizing that he needed to take action, grabbed his phone and called his parents, telling them what was happening. His parents, outraged and concerned for their son's safety, immediately called the police and reported Ms. Johnson's behavior. The police arrived quickly, and Ms. Johnson was arrested and taken away. Alex was left shaken, but relieved that the ordeal was over. As the case went to court, Alex testified against Ms. Johnson, sharing the details of her inappropriate behavior. The judge, finding her guilty, sentenced her to several years in prison. Alex and his family were relieved that justice had been served, but the experience had left them shaken. They realized that they had unknowingly trusted a predator into their home, and it had almost ended in disaster. The family vowed to be more cautious in the future and to always prioritize their safety and well-being. They also hoped that by sharing their story, they could raise awareness about the importance of recognizing and reporting sexual harassment. After the incident, Alex struggled to cope with the trauma he had experienced. He began to feel anxious and uneasy in his own home, constantly looking over his shoulder, expecting Ms. Johnson to appear. His parents, realizing the extent of his distress, sought professional help for him. A therapist worked with Alex to process his emotions and develop coping strategies to deal with the trauma. It was a long and difficult journey, but with time and support, Alex slowly began to heal. As Alex worked through his emotions, his parents also began to reflect on their own actions. They realized that they had been naive to trust Ms. Johnson so implicitly, without properly vetting her or monitoring her behavior. They vowed to be more vigilant in the future, to prioritize their son's safety and well-being above all else. Meanwhile, the incident had also sparked a wider conversation in the community about sexual harassment and predatory behavior. Neighbors and friends began to share their own stories of similar experiences, and a local support group was formed to provide a safe space for survivors to share their stories and seek support. As the community came together to support Alex and his family, they also began to demand change. They called for stricter background checks for domestic workers and for greater awareness and education about sexual harassment and predatory behavior. The incident had been a wake-up call for the community, a stark reminder of the importance of prioritizing safety and well-being. As Alex and his family continued on their journey towards healing, they knew that they were not alone and that their story had sparked a wider movement for change. As Alex navigated the complex emotions surrounding the incident, he began to experience feelings he couldn't quite understand. Despite the initial shock and fear, he found himself thinking about Ms. Johnson more and more. At first, he tried to brush off these thoughts, feeling guilty for even considering them. But as time went on, he realized that he was developing feelings for Ms. Johnson, feelings that went beyond mere gratitude or familiarity. Alex was torn. On one hand, he knew that Ms. Johnson's actions had been unacceptable and that he should be focusing on healing and recovery. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was drawn to her in a way that went beyond mere employer-employee dynamics. As he struggled to make sense of these conflicting emotions, Alex began to question his own identity and desires. He felt like he was living in a constant state of limbo, unsure of how to reconcile his feelings for Ms. Johnson with the trauma he had experienced. Despite his best efforts to keep these feelings hidden, Alex's parents began to notice a change in his behavior. They saw the way he would sometimes stare off into space, lost in thought, and they sensed that something was troubling him. One day, Alex's mother sat him down and asked him what was wrong. Alex hesitated, unsure of how to share his feelings. But as he looked into his mother's concerned eyes, he knew that he had to be honest. "Mom, I don't know how to explain this," Alex began, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I think I might have feelings for Ms. Johnson." His mother's expression changed from concern to shock, and she didn't know how to respond. She knew that Alex had been through a traumatic experience, and she worried that these feelings might be a manifestation of that trauma. "Alex, honey, I think we need to talk to someone about this," she said gently. "Maybe a therapist can help you work through these feelings." Alex nodded, knowing that his mother was right. He was confused and scared, and he didn't know how to navigate these complex emotions. But with the support of his family and a therapist, he hoped to find a way to heal and move forward. As Alex began therapy, he struggled to reconcile his feelings for Ms. Johnson with the trauma he had experienced. His therapist, Dr. Thompson, helped him explore these emotions, and Alex began to understand that his feelings were complex and multifaceted. On one hand, Alex felt a deep sense of vulnerability and shame. He couldn't believe that he had developed feelings for someone who had violated his trust so profoundly. On the other hand, he couldn't deny the strong emotional connection he felt to Ms. Johnson. Dr. Thompson helped Alex understand that his feelings were not uncommon. Many survivors of trauma experience complex emotions, including feelings of attraction or attachment to their perpetrators. As Alex worked through these emotions, he began to realize that his feelings for Ms. Johnson were not just about her, but also about himself. He was struggling to come to terms with his own vulnerability and powerlessness. With Dr. Thompson's guidance, Alex began to develop a greater sense of self-awareness and self-compassion. He learned to acknowledge his emotions without judgment and to prioritize his own healing and recovery. But just as Alex was starting to make progress, he received some unexpected news. Ms. Johnson was being released from prison early due to good behavior. Alex was shocked and overwhelmed by this news, and he didn't know how to process his emotions. Should he try to confront Ms. Johnson and demand closure, or should he avoid her altogether and focus on his own healing? Alex was torn, and he didn't know what the future held.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and share to your friends for more content like this.